industry on parade. A pictorial review of events in business and industry, produced each week by the National Association of Manufacturers.
Gloversville, New York, a town well named, for you'd have to search long and hard in this community to find someone not connected in some way with the manufacture of wool, leather, or fabric gloves. The telephone book here in Gloversville lists twice as many glove manufacturers as grocery stores. These are just a few. Let's look in first on one of the companies that produces some of the finest knitted gloves to be found anywhere. Each of the firms in Gloversville is fiercely competitive with the others and zealous in guarding its own private secrets of the trade. But most of the steps in glove making are pretty standard. In fact, they go back for centuries, although, of course, modern machines have added such refinements as the tube of knitted fabric, which is broken down into blanks for many gloves. The cuff and the hand have been knitted. Now all we need are the fingers and the thumb. Individual loops of yarn from the glove blank are transferred to the various needles in order to produce a continuous seamless stitch. The operator will drop off stitches as the machine progresses toward the end of the finger in order to achieve the proper tapering. The tops are closed by hand. Gloversville is also a great center for the making of knitted mittens, but right now we're concerned with its role as glove capital of the world. After washing and kneading, the soft, cushiony gloves, partially dried, are placed on wooden forms, which will give them their shape as they dry out completely in a low-temperature oven. Then they're carefully inspected before being shipped out under the proud label of one of the many companies in this town of craftsmen. But speaking of proud craftsmen, few can compare with the rugged individualists skilled in the art of manufacturing leather gloves. And most skilled are the cutters, the men who can take the skin of any of a number of different animals, feel it, stretch it, measure it, and by working around breaks or blemishes, come up with the greatest possible number of tranks, as they're called, the roughly cut blanks from which a pair of gloves will emerge. Since no two skins are exactly the same, and each skin varies in thickness from outside to inside, matching up the parts for a really fine pair of gloves is a tall order, especially since the leather must be cut so that lengthwise it won't give at all, and will give just the slightest bit crosswise to allow for movements of the hand. The thumbs and other parts are cut separately. Putting on those decorative ribs on the back of the gloves is called silking. Each glove is marked with the size and type of leather used. Genuine pigskin does not refer to the domestic animal we know, but to the peccary pig native to Brazil. In sewing the gloves together, there are almost as many types of stitches and seams as there are sizes. There are overseams, prick seams, and gauge seams, inseams, outseams, triple stitches, and whip stitches. All things considered, a good pair of gloves is about as singular as a set of fingerprints. The little inserts between the front and back of the fingers are called fourchettes. Decorative stitching means a lot to the appearance of the gloves, but it's the quality of the leather and the experience and integrity of these Gloversville veterans that determine whether the gloves fit as they should. And here's something else that ensures proper fit: putting the dampened gloves on steam or electrically heated brass forms. Grain finish gloves are polished on a soft felt wheel. Those with velvet finish will be brushed lightly. After clasps have been attached or buttons sewed on, the perfectly matched gloves are stitched lightly together and packed for shipment. Another quality product of a fairly small American town that takes deep pride in its contribution to our way of life. Here's one place where the sign means just what it says: a community of glovers, best in the world.
Since the founding of this nation, Americans have practiced a system of free, individual, competitive enterprise. Private capitalism here has produced more goods for more people than any other economic system known to man. Unlike the communist or socialist slave systems, under our form of capitalism, we continue to keep the strength, security, and living standards of all the people on a constantly rising scale. All of us have benefited by America's system of freedom and opportunity. Let's protect this system always.
Watermelon. It's a delicacy no child can resist, but there are a lot of children suffering from a disease called nephritis, to whom the juice of these plump products of Arkansas is almost a matter of life or death. This fact was brought forth very dramatically to American airline officials Buddy Culpepper and Tiny Tucker at the Little Rock Airport when urgent telegrams came in for watermelon juice during the winter, when watermelons just weren't to be had. Culpepper and Tucker got an idea and talked it up with other Little Rock residents who volunteered to help freeze the juice of the melons while there was plenty available for shipment during the off-season to afflicted youngsters who needed watermelon juice so desperately. The Home Ice Company of Little Rock contributed its freezing and storage facilities, and with equipment borrowed from local fruit packing firms, the volunteers pitched in. The meat of the melons is thrown into a converted berry juicer, which draws off seeds and pulp. The juice comes out through a filter bag and then is filtered again. Watermelon juice is not a cure for nephritis. It merely provides relief from pain and swelling until more definite treatment can be undertaken. But so far, they haven't come up with anything to replace it in this one special case. Now to the desk of Cliff Bullock of Home Ice Company, the letters pour in each winter. A nephritis victim needs watermelon juice. Here it is. At least in the limited quantity, the volunteers are able to turn it out. So now, when the calls come in, thanks to Buddy Culpepper and Tiny Tucker, the farmers of the area who contributed the melons, the Home Ice Company, the fruit packers who offered their equipment, the volunteer packers, and American Airlines, there is watermelon juice available. A remarkable demonstration of how some average citizens, not medical men or specialists of any kind, can lick a problem when they turn loose a little of that old determination and ingenuity.
Big things happening in the kitchen these days. Something more than dinner seems to be cooking out there. A kitchen built for display purposes of clear plastics by the Washington Steel Products Company of Tacoma reveals a few of the innovations, even when they're tucked compactly away inside drawers and cabinets. Mixing a cake or whipping up a batch of batter for waffles is simplicity itself with a setup like this. Everything as accessible as though it were left right out on the counter. And no problem putting things away when you're finished. Washington Steel Products is one of thousands of metal fabricators and processors working overtime these days to keep us supplied with the time-saving, labor-saving devices that spell the difference between drudgery and pleasant living. A great deal of extensive equipment is necessary for the economical production of even such a simple item as drawer pulls or parts for hinges. And after they're left here, they still must be flashed, finished, and plated. All the little conveniences we accept so casually or don't even notice, like the tracks on which our closet doors slide, are the fruits of extensive planning and careful workmanship. High-bake enamel ensures a permanent, easy-to-clean surface. And on to the shelves or showcases of our local hardware store, the fabulous repository of as many as 20 or 30,000 articles, all readily at hand, all helping to make life a little easier.
Every American realizes that we are carrying around cheap dollars today. Actually, the value of our dollar is nearly cut in half compared to 1939. The reason our dollar is worth 53 cents when we go to spend or save it is because our government has spent more money for 18 out of the last 21 years than it collected in taxes. The way to stop further inflation and strengthen our dollar is for our government to cut all unnecessary spending and balance the federal budget by putting all essential spending on a pay-as-we-go basis.
Here's a question. How does a firm like Reliance Electric and Engineering Company of Cleveland, faced with the need for expansion, meet the objections of residents bordering the site for their new plant? The householders were afraid the new Reliance plant in Euclid, Ohio, would drive their property values down and deprive their children of the space in which they used to play. The area had been zoned for industry, so the company had no legal obligation to the homeowners. But Reliance was determined to demonstrate its earnest desire to be a good neighbor. This was the firm's answer. The plant would be located hundreds of feet from the nearest house. The space between would be landscaped into an attractive park area for the enjoyment of the entire community. 70,000 cubic yards of dirt were brought in to make the grounds the most attractive in all Euclid. The company even graded the backyards of the houses so they would flow into the play area. The objections of the neighbors melted like ice cream in July. Incinerators, shipping areas, anything that would detract from the new beauty of the scene were placed out of sight. What was once a swamp has been converted into a ball diamond for use of employees as well as neighboring residents and their children. Needless to say, Reliance has become the most welcome of neighbors. Industry on Parade. A pictorial review of events in business and industry, produced each week by the National Association of Manufacturers.
Herding cattle by air on the Charles Boyd Ranch near Sugar City, Colorado. Just one of many new uses a great many rural Americans are finding for airplanes that can fly anywhere, land anywhere. More than 100 other planes owned by members of an organization called the Flying Farmers are arriving in Sugar City today, coming from 10 states, some as far away as Michigan and Texas, just for a barbecue. What does traveling 1,000 miles or more for lunch mean to a flying farmer? Not much, and distance is getting to mean less and less every day. In the few short years between World War II and the Korean outbreak, the light personal plane has graduated from strictly pleasure flying into the utility field. Firms like the Cessna Aircraft Company of Wichita, Kansas, now serve not only sportsmen and flying farmers, but far greater numbers of businessmen and organizations of all kinds, making even the most remote corners of the country quickly, easily accessible. Here at Cessna, thousands of skilled workers who had piled up impressive military production records set out to surpass themselves in turning out civilian models. Enlarging their facilities in 6 months by more than 50%, they went to work and soon reached the point where they were rolling out another plane about every 15 minutes, and at the same time keeping up to the rigid standards required by the armed forces. For now again, great numbers of planes from this plant are going into the service of the country. Here we see the installation of a wing on a Cessna 170, a low-priced 4-passenger plane that its makers call the family car of the air. The plane is raised to permit the addition of landing gear, the unique landing gear that'll let the plane put down on the most primitive sort of landing field. The airplane has grown to an importance almost equaling that of the automobile, just as the manufacturing methods used here resemble those on a Detroit assembly line. No longer just a plaything for the favored few, the personal plane is helping to bring Americans closer together, even making it possible for blood donors living far from blood processing centers to add their contributions to the urgently needed supply that must be kept flowing to our fighting men. It used to be that towns far out on the prairies could not participate in the campaign because the long trip by highway would render the blood useless. Thanks to a regular service maintained by Cessna for the Red Cross, thousands of additional Americans are enabled to do their bit for the men who need the support of all of us. It was just 7 years after the Wright brothers took to the air at Kitty Hawk that the company's founder built his first plane. The firm's been in the vanguard of the aviation industry ever since.
Today's management recognizes that human progress must go hand in hand with mechanical and scientific advances. Thus, hundreds of manufacturing companies provide positions for handicapped persons so that they, like all of us, may gain the human dignity and personal satisfaction of being productive and earning a good income. Properly fitted to his job, the handicapped worker usually proves that he is equal and sometimes superior to other workers. Especially in these days of intense civilian and defense production, industry welcomes physically handicapped workers.
A generation or so ago, this was a stapler. Bulky, awkward, and not too sure to work. Here's one produced today. Compact, reliable, inexpensive. And it'll even remove staples as well as put them in. The B8 model we just saw in action is only one of more than 800 staplers in the line of Bostitch of Westerly, Rhode Island. As we watch the B8 being fabricated and assembled, we see some of the production methods that have helped the staple to become the universally used fastener it is today. After core and base have been assembled, the spring is inserted. This keeps tension on the supply of staples, feeding another in as soon as one is used. The first stapler invented was used to fasten sheets of paper together, and Bostitch still produces more staplers for that purpose than any other. But meanwhile, the same principle has spread into many other fields, and new applications are being found constantly. Now, even parts of automobiles and airplanes are fastened together with staplers like the ones being assembled here. Staplers that drive wire through multiple layers of tough aluminum. The average car today contains between 1,000 and 3,000 staples. Actually, these heavy-duty jobs are stitchers, not staplers, for they make their own staples from a coil of wire. In a demonstration, 3 pieces of metal are fastened together as securely as they'd be by riveting. A bus-stitch worker shows how the food industry is using still another kind of stapler in sealing fruits and vegetables in pliofilm or other types of bags. Man uses many ways of holding things together: glue, string and tape, nails, screws and metal bands, interlocking parts, nuts and bolts, welding and soldering. Here in America, those who provide all these varied services and products compete endlessly to make their method best and so increase their business. These are some of the ways in which the makers of staplers, like Bostitch, make their bid. By finding ever new jobs they can perform more conveniently and at less cost, they build an ever more important role for themselves in our way of living.
Ever see a man rip a piece of sheet steel with his bare hands? It's easy when the steel is only 5/10,000ths of an inch thick. And at the American Silver Company in Flushing, New York, that's how thin they roll it. Not only steel, but a wide variety of other metals are reduced here to the microscopic thickness required for radar, telephone and other electronic equipment, for speedometers, navigation instruments and hearing aids. From the vault, the 1.5-inch thick bar goes first to a breakdown mill that cold rolls it to a thickness of 1/8 of an inch, while lengthening it from 18 inches to 20 feet. The 20-foot strip will go from here to what's called the intermediate mill, to be reduced from 1/8 of an inch to a 25th of an inch. Now it's thin enough to be coiled. A third milling will bring it down to 2/1000ths of an inch, after which it's ready for the last jump to a precise 5/10,000ths. The machine that accomplishes that is called a Zenzimer mill. A special measuring device uses electronics to make sure the metal is the proper thickness and uniform throughout. Then a heat treatment anneals the strip, gives it the necessary hardness. It passes through a curtain of flame into the oven, through a water bath, and is then rewound. American Silver Company used to roll only silver and gold for jewelry, fountain pens, mirrors, and the like. In 1951, government restrictions on the use of metals almost put the 26-man firm out of business. But Monroe Sherman, the company's founder, turned near disaster into good fortune by converting to the production of precision rolled metals of all kinds for industry generally. He found that most big metal mills were not prepared to take care of fine work of the sort he'd been doing all along, and his organization soon became the leading specialist in this very specialized field. Brass, phosphor bronze, stainless steel, tantalum, beryllium copper, and titanium are just some of the metals made ultra-thin here at a plant that used to work only on the old-fashioned precious metals, and now processes the really precious ones, like those that go into delicate instruments needed for supersonic flight, or, as here, in the diaphragms for hearing aids that pick up sound waves and help restore hearing to those who have lost it. Yes, you can very well say that American Silver is still dealing in precious metals.
All of us realize that our schools are crowded today, and additional millions will be crowding our schools within the next 5 years. We're going to need new buildings, more textbooks, and a tremendous amount of supplies. And we'll need several 100,000 elementary school teachers in the classrooms. It's up to every one of us to encourage real, intelligent attention to school problems at the local community level to ensure the best possible school system, and see to it that our teachers are paid on a basis consistent with their professional stature and their responsibilities to our young people.
Here's the reproduction of a scene that took place in Chicago just 100 years ago, when passengers boarded the newest, fastest train of that day for a trip all the way to Joliet. It was the first scheduled run by the brand new Rock Island Railroad, which celebrates its first 100 years by bringing out old number 9 for another run, with the passengers dressed in a fashion the old wood burner is accustomed to. All along the way, the Centennial Special is greeted by crowds used to seeing sleek streamliners scooting along these tracks. Incidentally, that very first train had the same name the streamliners carry today. It, too, was called the Rocket, even though 10 or 15 miles an hour could hardly be considered the speed of a rocket. It was a good speed for those days, though, and so were the sumptuous fittings of the dining cars. The trip's a lot of fun for the 600 business and civic leaders who made the junket, but it also points up how far the Rock Island, like other roads, has come since those early days of American railroading. Industry on Parade. A pictorial review of events in business and industry, produced each week by the National Association of Manufacturers.
All eyes are up as the Navy's Blue Angels, that fabulous team of jet pilots, demonstrate the nearest thing to perfection in precision tactical flying. Behind our flying aces, another team, the industrial team producing vital parts for their aircraft, like the blades that compress the air a jet engine burns in such tremendous quantities. At the Steel Improvement and Forge Company in Cleveland, we can see what goes into the manufacture of those little blades. The block moves on to have the impression of a compressor blade machined into its face. This, of course, is just one of thousands of forged products turned out here, but each different type or size of forging must have its own unique dimensions cut into a block. In fact, into 2 blocks, which together will force the metal into the desired shape. Die sinking, as it's called, is accomplished in this case with a cutting tool that's controlled by a sort of finger moving over a handmade model. When the finger drops into a depression in the model, the cutting tool digs out a similar depression in the die face. Now the die must be finished by hand, and achieving true dimensional accuracy is an extremely painstaking operation. Skilled craftsmen compare the work at its present stage with the blueprints to determine exactly what minute corrections must be made. Many Many hours of scraping, filing, grinding, and chipping will be followed by lapping and polishing to remove tool marks, blemishes, and sharp corners that would hamper the metal being forged from flowing smoothly into all the cavities of the die. Installed in the drop hammer, the dies are so fixed that the 3,000-pound hammer slams one down against the other with the heated metal slug in between. After much additional processing, here in the hands of Company President C.H. Smith, Jr. is the finished product, one of millions needed for jet aircraft. Compressor blades, just a sample of the sort of assignments American industry is carrying out in order to keep men like our Blue Angels flying and fighting.
Today, much of the credit for conquering disease goes to workers in biology. A few years ago, biologists learned that miracle drugs, antibiotics like penicillin, could be made from molds. Drug companies redoubled their efforts along these lines. One company tested 100,000 soil samples from all over the world in search of molds containing bacteria-fighting qualities. 2.5 years later, another wonder drug, terramycin, was discovered, again proving that America's new frontiers lie in chemistry.
A soda fountain crew busy making up orders for customers in the familiar paper cups and containers. Sanitary, attractive, disposable. Eating sodas and sundaes and drinking beverages out of such containers is nothing new. But dozens of uses that are new are being found for them every year at plants like that of the Lily Tulip Cup Corporation at Augusta, Georgia. From the paper mills, the high-quality stock arrives here and is hustled inside to start through a maze of processes that will transform it into amazingly tough containers. Waterproof, heat-proof some of them, and in designs suitable for just about any purpose you can imagine. The paper is printed with bright decorations and stamped out in one continuous operation. Shaped and sealed, they're dipped in a bath of paraffin. Other containers, those to be used for hot foods, for example, are not paraffin, but instead are given special treatments of their own. Only efficiency like this makes it possible to produce containers so inexpensive that we can afford to throw them away after using them only once. The containers are given frequent inspections at every step in the manufacturing process, while in the Lily Tulip labs, raw materials and finished products are put through rigorous tests to make sure they measure up to ever higher standards. In days gone by, a paper cup served its purpose if it held a liquid long enough for you to get it to your lips. But that's no longer true, and paper has had to keep up with, or ahead of, such revolutionary new developments as frozen foods and restaurant take-home service. Restaurants that find many of their old customers no longer dining out, whether because of the attractions of television, the arrival of young children, or whatever the reasons, have been turning to take-out orders as an extensive, practically untapped new source of business. Casserole dishes are especially popular for those who eat out at home. Here are some meat pies being prepared during the chef's slack hours. The casseroles are made of paper, but into the oven they go. Here's a young business wife in search of a nourishing but effortless entree for a husband who'll be home almost as early as she is. She'll get a hot or cold meal that's prepared, taken home, and served in paper containers that need no washing or wiping. People in the trade say it's the biggest thing to happen to the food service industry in years. Out come the pies with a crisp, flaky crust and the insides bubbling. But the containers are not even discolored by the heat. Just one of the ways in which we are putting paper to work in serving us pure foods and beverages. Whether it's out on a construction job, or in a factory, whether it's the in-plant meal for workers or the shopper's snack. More and more we turn to the well-known paper container that seems to be growing more useful every day. These huge logs are one of the two basic materials of an American industry that was cradled at Southbridge, Massachusetts, home of the Russell Harrington Cutlery Company. From the logs come the wooden handles for knives, and the first step in the process is cutting the logs down to proper size, then drying them in ovens. Meanwhile, the making of the steel blade begins in another part of the plant, with the shaping of the hot steel under a 1,000-pound drop forge. Forging improves the grain structure of the steel and distributes the weight evenly over the blade. While the blade is hot, the operator spreads out the steel to cover the outline of the blade, from the bolster or handle end to the cutting end. Then the blade is trimmed out in a power press and the remaining steel discarded. Dipping the blade in a pot of molten lead and then cooling it in a tank of oil is part of the heat treatment, which hardens and tempers the steel. And after that, the blade goes through the grinding operation, getting most of the flexibility ground into it. One of the blade finishing operations, removing the rough spots caused by grinding. And from there to another machine that polishes the two sides of the blade. To obtain a high polish, the blades go through these operations twice. The joining of the two basic materials, the blade and the handle, a job that's done with compression rivets. And then the unit goes through a blending and smoothing process on an abrasive belt. The knives are honed by hand to obtain a fine, sharp edge. And when the honing is finished, they're ready to decorate the kitchen of the most fastidious chef. For centuries, the world's finest cutlery came from a few towns in Europe. But American engineering skill and technique make our own knives second to none today. Whether the menu calls for a roast turkey with all the trimmings or a sweet-baked ham.
Inflation, America's #1 danger at home, can cripple America's defense program, the chances of peace, and can crush each of us personally. Inflation undermines the value of our dollar and hurts consumers, business, and government alike. We can protect ourselves, our families, and our country against dangerous inflation and the further reduction of our dollar if each of us will help turn out more goods, help keep costs down, use credit carefully, demand more economical national and local government, and save in every way. Let's beat inflation and build a sound, healthy dollar.
A family in Yonkers, New York sets out for an afternoon of recreation at its athletic club. They're not millionaires. Pop works for a living like anybody else at the Yonkers plant of the Phelps Dodge Copper Products Corporation. This is the $75,000 club he and other employees at Phelps Dodge set up for themselves quite independently of the company. And they burn the mortgage early this year. After some dancing, there might be a picnic on the extensive club grounds. Today, there's a barbecue to honor the members of the Little League baseball team the club sponsors. But any summer afternoon or evening, you'll find families or small groups here enjoying a picnic meal outdoors. Like so many Americans, the people of Phelps Dodge enjoy the company of the men and women with whom they worked and decided to do something about getting together after work with each other and their families. this an office worker, the daughter of an executive, or the wife of one of the hundreds of men who fabricate wire, cable, and other copper products? Is this little leaguer's father a department head or a mechanic? Who knows and who cares? These are the families of free Americans who care enough about each other to share their leisure as they do their working hours and raise their voices in song with the Phelps Dodge Chorus.
Start me with 10 who are stout, hard men, and I'll soon give you 10,000 more. Shoulder to shoulder and boulder.
Chorus has sung at veterans' hospitals and made many other personal appearances. But mostly these members of the club sing as they play, just for the fun of it.
All